Welcome back to another episode of Debatable with your hosts, Nina and Kyle. I'm Nina.
I'm Kyle. Nina, how is your Christmas spirit?
I prefer to call it holidays.
Holiday. So that's the episode today,
Mm.
like the war on Christmas.
I mean, kinda, I guess. I don't have a personal war with the holidays. I'm very neutral about it. But I know there are a lot of people that feel strongly about, you know, we should stop calling it Christmas. Or we should keep calling it Christmas because it's about Jesus and his birth. And at this point, like, Christmas has evolved so much. I think it's now just like a linguistic issue more than it is like what it means. Like, no one says Merry Christmas with the intention of, you know, like, it's not always the same meaning.
Yeah, it's not like Merry Christmas, don't forget to go to church, right? The issue there, I think, is around the world, we've seen a lessening of the quote unquote Christmas spirit. And I think it's because of capitalism.
Yeah, I think it's also, when we were younger, we didn't have the internet. We did, but it was like the DSL router where you couldn't like use your phone at the same time as the internet. Remember that?
Modem.
Yeah,
Did
there's
you-
like a modem.
Yeah, and at some point, like you needed to buy like prepaid cards for your internet.
Yeah. So I think our exposure to like capitalism as children is significantly less than now as adults. And, I would assume like, oh, probably children still feel the Christmas spirit. But, I teach kids, granted, I teach kids in a country that does not really celebrate Christmas, but even those that I encounter that do celebrate Christmas, I don't see the spirit anymore, probably because the internet has spoiled a lot of things for them.
The other day, we heard some carolers
Yeah.
were singing, and I remember saying, "Yeah, we need to give them money. I hope they pass by our house, and we should give them money because I want more carolers." When I was a kid growing up, I kept hearing carolers. I'm like, "Gosh, we should hide. We should pretend that we're not here." But now that like I'm older, I wish there was more of them.
They just vanished. I think because streets are no longer safe as well. Like, I mean, I lived in a area in Manila that was very, it was highly urbanizing. I was very near like main roads, so we didn't have a lot of carolers to begin with. But in general, I think the trend has died down. Also, there are no more incentives for kids to go out and hang out together. Like, do you know any kid now that's friends with their neighbor?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually you
Yeah.
band together as like a group of like, oh, we're part of the same street. Let's go carol, in the other streets.
And then you get like old milk cans, and then those are your drums. And I miss those. I
Yeah,
miss
take the big needle can, the metal tin.
I think the reason why we have some of this in relation to capitalism, I think it's because of technology, and then I think it's more crucially the death of the community, the physical community. Because how many years ago was this? 50 years ago, there was this dude named Alvin Toffler, rest in peace, is dead. He wrote 3 books, Future Shock, Hour Shift, and The Third Wave. And he was saying that one day, everyone will be super individualistic. The community, the family will be dead, right? Everyone will think about themselves. And he looked at it from the perspective of history, where you transition from a pre industrial to an industrial society and later to a post industrial society. And all of these factors brought like families away from their provinces, away from their rural settings where you had your entire extended family in the same household or in the same community, and you move to the city and like smaller and smaller increments, and then you eventually move out when you're quote unquote adult so you can work on your own.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
people move not away from work. They move closer to work.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean this is also related to the fact that it is objectively cheaper to live with other people, for instance, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there's now this trend of like living alone. It's seen as a benchmark of adulthood. And really, I think it's a capitalist ploy to get people to buy more property on their own. And like Obviously, if that's something you like, you prefer your privacy, that's absolutely fine. But I feel like they oversell it, right? And this has also shifted the way we celebrate certain holidays and the way we view certain events, the way we view our community. And, Christmas is all about those things. I mean, not always, but at least in my childhood, they were always about like community, family, getting together. Now, I think especially when you're browsing like social media and TikTok, it's about, oh, it's now sale season. It's about buying things, treating yourself if you haven't treated yourself enough this year, all that.
Yeah. And again, I'm still bringing it back to this idea of, post-industrial
Mm.
nations, because Alvin Toffler predicted, like, as change happens faster and faster, because that's what's happening, right? Like, can you imagine something that happened in January 2023? And like, what happened in January 2023?
I moved to Shanghai to work.
That seems long ago,
Yeah.
right? That seemed so long ago. That seemed like years and years ago. And Toffler is saying that as society progresses, we become more and more efficient with, invention. And so society changing events happen more and more frequently. And so a lot of people um, get debilitated because of the rate at which things change. Like there's a very significant mental health aspect to it. And this is what he calls future shock. That the prediction that he made back in the 1970s was that eventually we will have the means to make extremely personalized experiences. He called this the modular man, where you want a particular kind of song to define your life, there it is, right? You pick that song, modular, not the album, not the artist, whatever, just that one song, or even just one part of that song, and that can define your life. And eventually, that's like TikTok, right? You get entire songs and just like a small portion of that.
Or like algorithms in general. Like, everything now is personalized. Culture is dead.
Communities are
Subculture
dead.
subcultures don't exist. It's now about the individual aesthetic. Like it's no longer a culture because culture implies something shared. An
Yes.
aesthetic is like something personalized. It's something
Your
to you.
your personal
Your
brand.
vibe. Yeah, your personal brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was I gonna say about this? Sorry, we're sick. We're
Mhm.
still sick. Um, the architects of today's algorithms and social media. Spotify, for example, you have personalized playlists. Right?
Spotify Wrapped is
Yeah, Spotify.
individual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this was by design. The former chief economist of Spotify, wrote a book that I read this year, so long ago, in
Yeah.
the beginning of the year, called Tarzan Economics. And he was saying that the whole point of it is to create like a personalized experience. And that's the reason why you go to Spotify instead of pirating your music.
Or even watching MTV and like,
Yeah.
is MTV still
Or
alive?
Netflix, right? Or Netflix or Disney Plus or maybe Facebook or TikTok, right? So it is really the death of shared culture. Like you're never going to go to school anymore and talk about, oh, did you see the latest episode of this one TV show? Because you can watch anything. You're not restricted to like going back home and then everyone is watching the same Cartoon Network. Everyone is in on Ben 10, right? So like you will have some people watching Ben 10, you'll have some people watching Centaur World, and like these are two completely separate worlds and it will never interact because of how personalized things are. And I think that might be one of the reasons why like the Christmas spirit isn't really felt. Because the Christmas spirit, the heart and soul of it is that it has to be shared with other people.
I mean, that's like a more modern take. Because even if you look back, right, and this is where we now talk about how Christmas generally came to be, like sadly, it is also a tool for the eventual individualization. Because before we got here, we had to make sure everyone was first and foremost on the same page. And this kind of takes its roots in colonialism.
Yeah,
Sadly.
yeah.
And this is where we kind of ruined the Christmas spirit a little bit more in showing that, there was no proof that Jesus was born in December. In fact, there's a lot of things to suggest that he probably wasn't. It was just the most, I guess, the most convenient and efficient way to kind of integrate religion into things that people were already celebrating prior to them being converted to Catholicism.
Yeah, like the winter solstice celebration,
Yeah, or
right?
Saturnalia.
Yeah,
Right?
Saturnalia.
Yeah.
And Jesus was more likely born in the middle of the year anyway,
Yeah.
right? Like the star that guided the three wise men to Jesus in the manger could not have been in the night sky this time of year in December.
I mean, some people would argue that that's what made it a miracle, Like the reason why they follow the stars because you're not supposed to be there. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense,
I mean,
right?
yeah.
Because like the three wise men were supposedly wandering,
Mm.
right? And like they wanted a guide. Why would they ever go like, oh, that's a random star. That is now our guide, right? If they did that, then they weren't really wise people, right? It's like, whatever, let's pick any star.
Yeah, yeah.
This one is kind of weird. Let's follow it. Where does it lead you, right? So you are totally right that the whole idea of Christmas being celebrated at this time of year is in order for the early church to integrate with existing religious practices and rituals. And there are so many examples of that. This is something called cultural syncretism, syncretism, which is where you have different belief structures or different religious practices, different cultures, but because they're in such close proximity to each other, their beliefs blend. And that's the reason why, for example, in Mexico, you have something called the Las Posadas. The Las Posadas is like a procession, a parade, but at the end, they beat up a piñata for a star, right? So the like indigenous practices get mixed with what you said, colonial influences and colonial religions. I think we were talking about the other day about Simbang Gabi, right?
Yeah.
I did a bit more research on that because I said that Simbang Gabi is like a uniquely Filipino phenomenon. You said no, it came from Spain.
Yeah.
And what I thought was that you're right, does come from Spain, but the way that we celebrate it here is very different because
Oh.
apparently traditionally Simbang Gabi is not celebrated like late at night, but rather very, very, very early morning, like before dawn. And that was because the people who are celebrating Simbang Gabi, mostly farmers in agricultural areas, they needed to wake up very early anyway. So they moved it to very, very early morning so that most of the attendees, Filipino farmers could attend. And more than that, because there are so many of us and the churches at the time were so small, they weren't very spacious. A lot of them had to celebrate Mass outside. And so, because it was outside, they had more ability to, bond with each other, turn it into like a little bit of a festival. And that's where you get more communal aspects of it. And that's also the reason, like, traditionally, after you go to church, you come home and then you eat like puto bombong,
Mm-hmm.
you eat bibingka, a lot of like holiday themed food.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back as well, I mean, I guess you're right that a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things were also admittedly engineered to be that way. For instance, we used to celebrate, at least in the United States when it was introduced, right? They would celebrate the 12 days of Christmas. It would start December 25 and then it would go all the way um to like January 6. I don't know how to count, but you get it, right?
Uh-huh.
And it was like an adult festivity thing, right? Like it was mostly for people to party, to share their harvest, to share their bounty, and it was not known as, a time for giving. It was mostly a time for kind of bragging, kind of like putting all our loot together and celebrating all of it. And eventually, that's where people figured out, if we're sharing things anyway, might as well profit from it. And that's where they started, the idea of gift giving.
Oh, true ba?
Yeah.
I always thought like the reason why we had gift giving was because, the three wise men, they gave gifts.
I mean, yeah, that was also it, but objectively, why did it have to be things that had to be purchased, right? Like people, they were giving things that they probably had on them already, the three wise men. But capitalism saw it as an opportunity to profit, and from there it kind of snowballed. Children got involved, and it became very popular to give kids gifts. They introduced Saint Nick, right, as a mascot, because they realized that just revolving it around Jesus, while good, would not incentivize people who are non religious to kind of participate in the event. You're like, Saint Nick, oh, that doesn't appeal to you? The idea of Santa Claus. Like this is our deity now for
Father
Christmas.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's Father Christmas,
Yeah.
right?
Depends on like how you call them, I suppose.
So the meaning of Christmas, right? Or the way it's celebrated changes depending on the context.
Mhm.
Like people in power sort of determine like or nudge you towards a particular way of celebrating. But the opposite can also be true. Like Christmas has historically also been used as a way to resist. So,
Mm.
for example, and I'm not sure if you know this because you've never talked about it before, but in the Caribbean, there were lots of slaves. But during Christmas time, many were not required to do hard labor, right? And so they had an opportunity to share information, plan out covert actions, stuff like that. So I think that it can also be used as a way to resist. Um, and they also changed the meaning of Christmas a little bit. Not changed, but more of like emphasized and reframed some stuff. Because framing, right? It's not like there's a completely separate reality. Framing is more of like, what are you trying to emphasize? And so for a lot of these slaves, they emphasize Christ's story as a story of resistance against a foreign or colonial power. And so you can see that it is also a way for many communities to resist against colonialism.
Oh. Do you know the story of why we called Christmas Xmas? We don't think much about it. But like apparently in like 1966,
Uh-huh.
they kind of someone wrote a book about like, oh, this is an attack on Christmas. People want to call it Xmas now to remove the religious associations and to make it more palatable, and that's X means unknown in
But,
math.
but that's fake news, isn't it?
I mean, that is something that was published in 1966. It is fake news, but the term stopped, which is my point.
Because as far as I know, like the term Xmas has been used for a longer period of time, like even before the 1960s. I think even during the 1800s, people have been using Xmas.
Yeah, but in 1966, that's when like someone named Gerald Smith published that Xmas was a blasphemous omission of the name of Christ. And X being an unknown quality means that we are going closer to the devil. All fake news, but it kind of just shows that even with the evolution of Christmas and the fact that it started out as a colonial tool, it became a capitalist tool, people are still resisting that evolution. They still want to bring it back to, it has to be about Christ and stuff.
Hmm. What you can see there is that the war on Christmas kuno
Mm.
has existed for
Years.
so many years,
Yeah.
decades, really. And so, do you think they're right? Like the war on Christmas, people like we're trying to remove Judeo-Christian values.
I mean, to be honest, like if we really want to be traditional about it, Christmas does not exist. Like if you want to be like true, you go back to the pagan like celebrations of Saturnalia. But harvest season, about like the winter solstice. It's not an attack on something that you yourself also created as a form of an attack. Like, I don't know. And like, if you're religious, I'm sorry about this, but you gotta admit a lot of it is sort of made up. I mean, the story of Jesus probably not, of course. Um, there are, if you're looking at the Bible, but the fact that it's in December, the fact that for some reason we have a lot of reds and whites and greens as the main colors of Christmas, all of that is manufactured after the fact.
Why is it red? Like, do you have any idea why it's
I
red
actually don't
and
know. It just came to me. You were drawing a Christmas tree earlier and you were using the traditional Christmas colors. And then I thought to myself, like, how did we associate it with that? Because when I was growing up, those were already the colors. But have you ever done like Christmas wreaths?
yes?
The Advent wreaths? That's like in relation to Christmas, we also celebrate Advent season, right? You would have the purple candles and the one pink candle. And I was like, why are those the colors associated with Christmas? Why is it red, green, white, maybe yellow and gold for the star? But
I think it's. I think my theory for why it's green and red is because of the holly. The holly, it's a plant and it's evergreen. So even during winter seasons, you will still see these things flowering, and the flowers are small red spheres amidst like green leaves. And with the snow, it's white, green, and red. That's my theory.
that makes sense, yeah. Apparently, C.S. Lewis, what else did he write that people would know?
Narnia.
Yeah. Apparently, in the 20th century, he wrote a book called Xmas and Christmas, a lost chapter from Herodotus. It was like a satirical discussion of like how Christmas has evolved and split into the religious aspect and the commercial aspect, and they want to coexist but also be the lead at the same time. And that's why we have the mess of cultures that we have today.
Yeah.
So I feel like
There is a war, but not on Christmas. It's a war in Christmas.
I mean, there was also a war on Christmas itself. Like, apparently, the Soviet Union.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yes.
you have an entire like notes on that. Like,
No. But like, I was talking, for example, I think Charlie was talking about Christmas the other day. I was
huh?
like, "Hey, I have some Christmas facts for you." And Charlie was like, you know what? For some reason, I totally expected you, Kyle, to start a rant about Christmas traditions. But what is it about? What were you about to say?
So apparently, the Soviet Union, and other communist regimes at the time banned Christmas, to be aligned with Marxist Leninist doctrines of like state atheism,
Yes.
right? So it's like separation of church and state. And it was very clear at the time, like, we don't want to celebrate it because I guess in the early 1930s, it was predominantly still associated with religion. And even Germany tried to counter this, like Nazi Germany to be specific, counter this by like, yeah, it is religion, but it helps us like, promote our idea of like a superior race. So they apparently released some Nazified Christmas songs. I don't know what those are. Luckily, I've never encountered them. Maybe we have and we just don't know. Now I'm scared. I'm gonna look that up later.
Another interesting part of that story is there were lots of religious people who still wanted to celebrate Christmas, but they couldn't, right? So
Yeah.
they had to secularize the very Christmas practices. And that's the reason why, even today, in post Soviet states, they still have Christmas trees, except they're not called Christmas trees. They look exactly like Christmas trees, but they're called Novigod trees,
Oh.
which means New Year trees, right? So the reason why they moved it, basically, they moved it from Christmas time to around the New Year time is because they're not allowed to celebrate Christmas. They're saying, well, this isn't a Christmas tree. we're celebrating the new year. And that's not a Christian thing.
Ah,
That's a very secular thing.
it's a very worldwide thing. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it just so happens to be in here the time.
I think it's very fascinating where if we have like cultural voids, we try our best to fill in those voids using things that we already have somewhere else. There's another example here where in Japan, they have a very unique way of celebrating Christmas. Here in the Philippines, one of the ways that we celebrate Christmas with our family is make sure that you have Coke.
Oh yeah, that was like a very smart campaign from Coke.
Yeah. In Japan, in the 1970s, they were very fascinated about Christmas and like Western culture, but they didn't have a lot of established, practices
Mm-hmm.
with how to celebrate Christmas. And what filled in that cultural gap was Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Huh.
Yeah. So a lot of Japanese people during Christmas specifically, they should get KFC because of a
Amazing.
marketing campaign in 1970s. KFC means Kentucky for Christmas.
Whoa. When was this again?
The 1970s.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. What was the campaign for Coke?
I don't know. It's just like they have great ads
That's
during
that's
Christmas
true.
time. They have, like it wasn't. It's not like the ads that we have now, where it's a story, right? Like it's very dramatic. It was all about like the associations, like a very subtle associations to Christmas, right? I think this is how capitalism works, right? Like you look for voids in culture, or sometimes they create voids. Like no one woke up one day and like, you know what I really need today? I need an algorithm that tells me exactly what to think about any particular issue, but in a way that's consistent with my already held political beliefs. No one woke up and thought of that, right? But capitalism said, yeah, but imagine how much attention you're gonna give me if you're going to have this kind of algorithm. And that's why they created that. So I think that like a lot of competing cultures, right? Competing cultures. It doesn't necessarily have to be religion versus capitalism. It can be religion versus another religion. And where there's a void, they try to create like a void in order to fill that in with parts of their own culture. And that's the reason why you mentioned the 12 days of Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
A version of the 12 days of Christmas thing in Iceland, for example, comes in the form of the Yule lads. The Yule lads, where the 13 days leading up to Christmas, weird things will happen. Okay, weird things will happen. Like mischievous little lads will play pranks on you. Like you will lose your socks or whatever. And you have to put your shoe on the window. And if you're a good boy that year, the Yule lads will give you gifts every single day for 13 days leading up to
Ah.
Christmas. But that is like the reason why we have that is before the 1700s, like way before. Um, in Icelandic folklore, there were 13 lads that actually, no, there were more like 82. Okay,
What?
so like it really depends on who's telling the story. There's like anywhere from 13 to 82. But before the 1700s, there are so many of these spirits and they would mess you up. They will mess you up. And the reason for that is, by the way, they were like trolls who were like very menacing, very angry.
Oh, okay.
Right now, they're like tiny little men,
Like
tiny little
sprites
people,
or something?
like sprites.
Yeah.
But before, they were like big menacing trolls that will beat up kids.
Excuse me?
Yes, will beat up kids. And they were meant to symbolize the harshness of winter. So you need to
Oh.
be extra careful during winter. It's the same thing that you mentioned like a couple of Christmases ago in the very first debatable Christmas episode where we talked about the origin of Santa, like zooming through the air in the night sky.
You should listen to that episode, by the way.
Before to say that was Odin.
Mm.
And so if you were a kid and you were out during that time, he will kidnap you and beat you up. And that's where Krampus also comes from. And like, if you're naughty, if you don't listen to your parents, if you don't stay safe, bad things will happen to you. Because winter is a very, very harsh time of the year. And then later on in the 17th, they banned horror stories. There was a royal decree that banned horror stories being used to discipline children. So they had to water down the horror of the 82 trolls that will come to beat you up if you're naughty. So it eventually became like 13 slightly mischievous lads who will give you little treats in your shoe if you leave it out the windowsill.
Oh, and then eventually became the elves or something.
No, like
Oh,
this,
just
even today, we celebrate, people in Iceland celebrate the Christmas season by paying homage or paying tribute
to the 13.
to the 13 Yule lad.
Wow, Yule lads. That's cool. What else you got?
What else do I have? Did you know that every year Norway sends a Christmas tree to the United Kingdom for Trafalgar Square as a thank you for World War II?
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, so these are diplomatic Christmas trees.
Diplomatic Christmas trees. That is a sentence. Another one that I have
Is in Ukraine, they use spider webs as Christmas tree ornaments.
How come?
That's because of a folklore story where there was a poor family and they couldn't afford to decorate the tree. So Christmas morning, they woke up and they saw like spiders covered their tree in webs. And it was very magical because when the sunlight shone through those webs, they looked like silver and gold. Many magical things come from very humble beginnings, right? Like it's a Christmas miracle, don't give up hope, stuff like that. Because, if you give up hope, you might not be able to appreciate the time when spiders create your Christmas ornaments.
I have something recent. So, Canada, like a month ago, declared Christmas to be racist and like a product of colonialism. And like we all know that's true. But I think they were kind of pointing out the sort of hypocrisy that, for a world that claims to be secular and to respect all religions, how come it's only really the Christmas season that most international companies are giving time off? Like, sure, a lot of other holidays are now getting their recognition and time off, but there is like an entire celebration, an entire expectation of time off surrounded during, December season. A lot of people argued against this and saying, well, it's also because it's winter. It is a very difficult time to work. It's actually much more productive and better for mental health for people to have an excuse to stay home and celebrate with family. It's also a great time. Like, if everyone is in agreement that December is a time where people can relax more or less, or a lot of companies are relaxed, it's a time where everyone will agree to meet, right? Regardless of where you come from. If you work abroad, it's a time for you to come home. And I understand the critique of the Canadian government. I'm not sure like the full extent of this conversation that they had with the people about it. But basically they were saying it's still rooted in the idea that one religion is superior. And if we could, we can still probably have those time off, right? Just not under the pretense of like a Catholic idea of celebrating the birth of one Messiah that's not applicable to everyone else.
Well, that's why we call them happy holidays now, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, a lot of conservatives are not happy about that shift in name. And honestly, I also have trouble transitioning my brain to saying happy holidays. I mean, I grew up with Merry Christmas. I never thought much of it. But that's also my own bias that I have to reevaluate as well. Like, just because I'm used to it, it's not an excuse. Right? Like, I had an embarrassing moment yesterday where
Oh yeah, I was gonna say.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we both had where we yelled Merry Christmas to someone that does not celebrate and cannot celebrate it in the Philippines in particular. I don't want
Because of
to
their religion, yeah.
because of their religion, and I was just like, what?
Because they replied with
Happy New Year.
they're like Merry Christmas, and they said
Happy New Year. And I was like, oh no, let go. I'm so sorry to have put you on the spot. Right. The commission in Canada claimed discrimination against religious minorities in Canada is grounded in Canada's history of colonialism. In the discussion, the practice of religion itself is conflated with discrimination against other religions. In fact, the paper reads that while religion can be grounds for discrimination, religion is not defined in the Canadian Human Rights Act.
What site was that from? So we can cite it properly.
Well, it is the post millennial.
Post
Um,
millennial.
they're just like really
Canadian news.
yeah, and it was according to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. So that's the
Oh,
actual source. I'm just reading from the website that reiterated what the commission said.
I think the relationship between Christmas and secular societies is very interesting to me because, on one hand, right, you are correct that it is a very Christian thing. It's Christmas, it's in the name. But the way that people practice it now is very secular, notwithstanding the very individualistic, capitalistic aspects to it, the ones that make me sad. But like for most people, they don't celebrate it on religious terms. They celebrate it like with their families and the rituals and traditions their family has created or their particular country or community have created. And so I think that it's interesting because obviously was some parts of it involve Christmas influencing us, right? Colonialism and all that stuff. But there are also other ways that we influence the way that Christmas is celebrated. So, is there a possibility for us to decolonize Christmas? And I Googled that last night, decolonizing Christmas. And
Let me Google that as well.
yeah, decolonizing Christmas. And one of the articles that showed up, I really didn't like
Mm.
because it was from Father Ranhilio Aquino. And he was just like decolonizing Christmas from capitalism or something like that. Like, let's
Oh,
remember Jesus.
oh
Like,
wow.
that's not what I think of when I think of decolonization.
But I think it raises a good point though, because if we do decolonize Christmas, we are just decolonizing it from religion. And where will it go? Right? Like I don't think it's reasonable to expect that Christmas will just go away. In fact, I think it's so deeply rooted that it might be impossible. Right? It has to decolonize does not mean and has never meant to remove everything. Like to just
Yeah,
right?
Zionists.
Yeah.
I'm looking at our recording. Yeah, Zionists.
Yeah, but to decolonize just means like reining it in, taking a step back. So I don't think it's a realistic expectation for us to abolish
Yeah.
Christmas altogether. But it does leave the question of who gets it, right?
Yeah. I think it's more of like recognizing which parts were imposed on us and reclaiming it as our own. I feel like decolonization is very tricky sometimes because some of our like most cherished democratic values were given to us or were imposed upon us by colonial powers. For example, our constitution. We always think about it's bad if you violate the Constitution, right? But the Constitution is a colonial project. It was an imposition by the American colonial powers in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So, how do you find that balance between the need for decolonization, but at the same time getting the best of what was imposed upon us?
Oh, I saw this interesting title. I was just thinking about this, but they phrased it really well. It says, you can't have your decolonized cake and eat from colonialism too. Which I think is what you're trying to say. Like it seems very difficult. I don't agree with the website. It's unsettling America, and I know that there's not a reliable source, but I found the title intriguing because it does give you something to ponder on. Like, how can you decolonize parts you don't like, but still claim ownership and say, I want to keep these parts? Isn't it hypocritical to say, I did not like that I was colonized, but thank you also for giving me things. I will keep this. Right? I think what's the balance there? I think there is one, but most of the websites I look at kind of use it as a aha. And I hate that, by the way.
What was your opinion first, Beth?
Well, I think that you can do both. Like recognizing that there are good parts can still happen without the act of colonization, which colonization is not just like here are some things, right? It's we will destroy your entire culture, impose our own. take over your land, you are now part of us, right? You are like our little brother, our little sister, which is how we refer to the United States. We call them Big Brother. And I also feel like it's very reminiscent, or the argument that, you can't have it all. It's very reminiscent of, I hate capitalism.
But
Yeah,
you're very shrewd.
yeah, but you're very cute. Or like, oh, society's so unfair. Oh, but you live in it. Like, we can't remove it, right? Like, it's unreasonable for you to expect that just because we do not like colonialism, that we suddenly have to, I don't
Opt
know,
out of everything.
opt out of everything and like live the indigenous lifestyle once again.
Like you can expect, like, I really believe in decolonization. So I will stop hanging out with my family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the idea that, I saw this tweet like recently, another one of those like very conservative individuals. Like, this person had a, I guess like something that signaled that they were socialists, like, oh, maybe they had an eat the rich sticker, but it was on their MacBook. And you're like, oh, how are you doing that? I have a MacBook. Like, okay, like, do I just opt out of society in general and not have any device?
Do I stop working?
Do I stop
Do I
working?
stop trying to help myself live?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can critique, but at the same time, still utilize the tools that were given to you. If anything, I would view it as a form of reparations. Like, we don't like you, but at least let us reclaim the things at least, right, that you gave.
I think it really is about reclaiming.
You're right.
Right? Like, I was gonna say reclamation, and that's completely wrong. Like, watch the Glass Onion, and yeah, that's completely wrong. I think that, right, you live in a capitalist society, you don't like it, but you have MacBooks, right? The thing about that, in my opinion, is when you don't like capitalism, it's not necessarily you don't like things. It's that you don't like that all of the gains from production are concentrated into the capitalists and the ultra rich. And the same way, I think that the line that I draw here is, I don't like that Christmas was imposed upon us by a colonial master. But my real concern there is, when we're trying to use Christmas, it shouldn't be to glorify those colonial masters. It should be used and reclaimed so that it's made to empower communities, local communities, and
Yeah.
local practices as well.
Yeah, and I feel like we might not be taking the correct steps there, because a lot of people, they view like, oh, we don't like the religious aspect of it. We're gonna go the commercial route, which is, you're not decolonizing it. You're just looking at a different form of,
Imperialism.
yeah, a
Yeah.
different form of imperialism. And I love getting gifts. I love giving gifts. People that know me know that I take a lot of pleasure in, knowing what to give people and curating like a wish list. But it's not because I want to glorify the capitalist aspect. If anything, I don't care about the cost of the gift. I hate the fact that I have to buy these gifts even. And the fact that they're so expensive because of the Christmas markup. Even when they claim it's a sale, like if you look at the original price.
Yeah, true.
Right? Like they say it's 30% off. But it's 30% off from a bumped up price. And after
Like the price is 40% higher, but
Yeah.
they put the 30% off.
Exactly. But yeah, I don't like that. But I do enjoy the community aspect, like being able to give someone something, to be able to form a connection. And I know, like, I could make my own stuff. But in this capitalist world where I also have to work, who has the time to hand make a quilt to give to someone? I wish I did, right? But that's the compromise I have to make. Like, I reject the religious aspect of religion, of Christmas. I respect it. I will not diss on anyone that wants to do simbang gabi or go to church, or whoever still celebrates Advent wreaths, right? I did that for majority of my life as a Catholic schoolgirl. But that's just not the interpretation I want for myself. And maybe that's the thing, right? Maybe the real way to win Christmas, I guess, if
The
that's
war on Christmas.
yeah, to win the war on Christmas, don't play the game with everyone else. Like, define it for yourself. Make your own rules. It's a game for you to play, not for you to be a pawn of. Right?
Yeah. I think we can end this with a quote from your favorite episode of my favorite sitcom, which is Community.
Mm.
Your favorite episode is Bed's Uncontrollable
Yes.
Christmas. And sorry, spoilers, but you have to watch it. You have to
Yeah,
watch
what's it?
Community. Like they were looking for the meaning of Christmas. And then the conclusion was the meaning of Christmas is that Christmas has a meaning and that you can make it for yourself. Used to be something. It used to be you spending time with your parents, but that might not be possible for you anymore. But there are still some things that are possible today, right? You can still spend it with people you love, your friends, and you just have to take the effort to make Christmas be about that.
All right. So that's our episode for today. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next one. Happy holidays. I
Happy
didn't.
holidays.
Happy holidays and happy new year. Bye bye.
Bye.